Hello, and thank you for joining us to learn more about the QuoteWerks Layout Designer. A quote in QuoteWerks is made up of an enormous amount of data, and the QuoteWerks Layout Designer is used to define how this data will be organized into pages and presented to a potential customer. Today, we will demonstrate many basic features and techniques that will help us get the most out of the QuoteWerks Layout Designer. Let's take a look at a print layout. One of the most common activities in the Layout Designer is inserting fields. We can insert several different kinds of fields, including data fields, system fields, formula fields, and dialog fields. Most of the data on our document can be pulled into the print layout by inserting a data field. When inserting a data field, we can choose from 4 tables of data. The Document Headers table contains data on the QuoteWerks document that is not related to individual line items. From here, we can include values like the document name, the document number, and the document date. We can also include values like customer contact information by using the Ship To and Sold To fields. If we scroll back to the top, we'll see a special set of fields that begin with the ampersand. These special fields are called macro fields, and they're special because rather than being individual fields in the document, they're calculated or pieced together from other fields by the QuoteWerks system. A good example is the Sold To Full Address field, which pieces together all of the Sold To address fields so that they can be inserted together without manually inserting each one individually. The document header fields will generally be used in the header or footer sections of the print layout. Let's add the document number and date to our layout. We'll select the DocNo field and click OK. And notice that once we click OK, we have this floating box attached to our mouse cursor. The box represents our new data field, and the next click will designate its position. We'll place it here next to the number label. Then we can resize it. We can resize fields manually by selecting it, and then we'll notice that we have these resizing handles around the border. We can grab any of those handles and drag in any direction to manually resize the field. Now let's add the document date also. Notice that in addition to using the Insert menu at the top, we can also right-click to access the Insert menu. We'll select the Doc Date field and insert it next to the date label. Now we can see the values on the document. The document number and date appear here in the top right-hand corner of the document where we inserted our fields. So what else should be updated in our header? Notice that we're also missing the Sold To contact information. So let's get that fixed. The Sold To information is specific to our quote document, but not related to the product line items. So those fields will be in our document headers also. We can scroll down and choose Sold To Company. Notice that the formatting is incorrect, but we'll fix that in a moment. Then we'll add Sold To Contact. And for the address information, we'll use one of those macro fields. So we'll insert Sold To Full Address. To fix the formatting of our fields, we could manually format each one, but the Layout Designer has an Active Style feature that can be used in the same manner as the Format Painter in Microsoft Word. If we select a field with a format that we want to copy, we can choose Format and Set as Active Style. This will essentially copy all of the formatting information of the selected field. Then we can select the field that we want to copy the formatting to, and then choose Format, Apply Active Item Style. That will copy the formatting to the new field. We can do the same for each of our fields. Note that the active style is also applied to new fields as they are added to the layout. So we should think about what is set as the active style before we insert new fields, or we may have to revise everything. For the final enhancement to our header, let's add an extra picture. It might look a little nicer if we included a graphical signature with the sales rep information. So we'll go to Insert and choose Picture. From the Picture File selection window, we can choose any bitmap or JPEG image to include in our print layout. And now we'll resize the field manually. Next, let's add a special field to our header that will only be used when a certain custom field is used in the document. Let's go back to the Quote Workbook. We have many custom fields in QuoteWerks, but only 2 of them are number fields. The rest are text and date fields. Let's say that our number fields are already taken up by 2 important numbers. And let's say that sometimes we want to include square footage for a project on the quote. And so we need 2 more fields to store width and length values. So we've decided to use custom text 01 and custom text 02 for storing our extra numbers. And whenever the fields are populated, we want to calculate square footage and display it on the quote. Let's start with a header label. We'll set an existing header label as the active style, and then we'll insert a new field. Since we only want the label displayed when the width field is populated, we'll need to use a basic formula field. Let's call it Square Footage Label. As mentioned earlier, a thorough explanation of building formulas is covered in a separate video on using formula fields in the Layout Designer. For this field, we basically want the formula to say, if a width has been provided, then display square footage. So we'll insert the operator if, then we'll reference the width field, which is really custom text 01 in the document headers table. Then the operator less than or greater than, which can also mean not equal to, and then no text. So our expression now says, if custom text 01 is not equal to nothing, which can also read if custom text 01 is equal to anything, then display square footage. Then we'll add a formula field to calculate the square footage. We'll set a new active style and insert a new formula field. Like the label, we only want this value displayed when we have a width. So we'll start with the same condition. If the width is not equal to nothing, then. Now we need to multiply the width and the length to get the square footage. But watch what happens if we just use those fields. We get this field type mismatch error because we're trying to multiply two text fields. Math operations can only be done on numbers, and QuoteWerks doesn't know that our text fields contain numbers unless we tell it. Fortunately, we have a way to tell it about the numbers. We can use a function that will convert our text values to decimal values. It's called the toNumber function. We can use the function and then we can do our math operation. Notice that when we use the function, it includes an opening parenthesis. We need to make sure that we close that parenthesis before we continue. Next, we'll use our multiplication operator, and then we'll convert our length to a number also. And we'll make sure to include the final closing parenthesis. Now when we click OK, we don't get an error and we can insert the field. Let's update the format. We should include a few decimal places. When the width and the length measurements are not supplied and our square footage is not calculated, this field will contain the value of 0 because number fields cannot be empty. To handle this situation, we'll choose to suppress 0 values so the field will be completely empty when we're not calculating square footage. And let's center the value. We don't see any square footage information yet because we don't have length and width measurements. And we see that both the label and the field now appear when we enter width and length measurements. So everything looks good in our header. So next, take a look at our line items. And notice that they only seem to include the description, even though we have columns for quantity, unit price, and extended price. Let's set the active style, and then add our missing fields. We can insert from the Document Items table to refer to fields on the document that are part of the line item details. The first field we're missing is the quantity. We'll insert this field into Detail Section 1 because the line items are printed by the detail sections. A complete explanation of the various sections can be found in the Layout Designer Basic Overview video. Let's insert the other two fields. And now we have the rest of our line item fields, but they look a little sloppy because the alignment is off. We can select all of the fields and use a single feature to match up the alignment. Since the description field was already here, let's try to match everything to that. The alignment feature will move all of the selected fields to match the position of the last field selected. So we'll select everything else first and then select the description. We can select multiple fields by holding down the Control key and then clicking additional fields. We'll choose the Arrange menu and then Align. Selecting Top Edge will move all of the fields so that their top edge matches the top edge of the last field selected, in this case the description field. Now that they're all aligned, we can see that the sizes don't match either. The new fields are slightly taller than the existing fields. We have a sizing feature that works the same way as the alignment feature. If we select our fields again, we can choose Arrange, Sizing, and then Same Height. The Same Height feature will resize all of the selected fields to match the size of the last field selected. Again, in this case, the description field. Now everything is neatly sized and arranged. Now let's preview the document, and we can see the rest of our columns on the line item details. There are two other tables that we can insert data fields from. The application table includes fields that are associated with the installation of QuoteWerks, and there are three main sets of fields. The licensee fields are populated on the Change Registration Info screen under the Utilities menu of QuoteWerks. The Logged In User fields are populated on the My Preferences screen under the Tools menu of QuoteWerks. And the Our Location fields are populated on the Company screen under the Tools menu and then Options menu of QuoteWerks. And finally, the Contact Manager table allows us to reference fields that may be available from our integrated CRM. This allows us to include data that may be stored in our integrated Contact Manager but is not stored in the QuoteWerks document. For instance, we could include the details for the last contact date or location, or the next scheduled meeting or action. We also have a few more kinds of fields that we can insert other than data fields. We can insert system fields, which allows us to insert environment values that are not necessarily part of the contents of the QuoteWerks document. We can include fields like date, time, and page number. We can also insert formula fields. Inserting a formula field can get a little detailed and is covered more thoroughly in a separate video about using formulas in the QuoteWerks Layout Designer. We can also insert dialog fields. Inserting a dialog field allows us to prompt the user for input before the document is printed. A dialog field can be used in basic ways like allowing the user to include a last-second message on the document, or it can be used in more advanced ways like allowing the user to specify options and having formulas, section filters, and conditional formatting respond based on the user's input. Most importantly, note that the user input provided in response to a dialog field is never stored in the QuoteWerks database. Once the response has been used to print the document, the data is discarded and cannot be retrieved from anywhere inside of QuoteWerks. A basic use of dialog fields is demonstrated in the separate basic overview video for the Layout Designer. Next, let's think about some of the products on our quote that include pictures. We can use this icon in the quote workbook to display the picture panel. Notice that some of the products include pictures, but others do not. Products with a picture will display it in the Set Picture panel when the product is selected. Our print layout didn't account for these pictures, so they're not shown on the document yet. Let's expand our detail section and make room for the pictures. Product pictures can be included by adding the picture field from the Document Items table. Including the picture involves more functionality than just displaying a field of data from the document. It requires retrieving the picture reference from the database, finding the picture file, and rendering the graphic itself on the document. Because the field involves these extra behaviors, it is a macro field instead of a standard field. So we'll use this field, &picture. The picture field has a few special formatting options. We can resize the product picture to fit neatly inside of the picture field. If we do resize, we have the option to maintain the aspect ratio of the product picture when fitting it inside of the field. It's usually a good idea to use this because it will improve the picture quality. We can also reserve space for the picture field even if the picture is not present. This would force each line to take up the same amount of vertical space whether it has a picture or not. When this is unchecked, any products that don't include a picture will have the extra space collapsed so it won't take up all the blank space. Next, let's add a dividing line to enhance the aesthetics of our document. We need to make it a vertical line, which we can do from the Lines Format options. We have two different kinds of vertical line. An ordinary vertical line will cause gaps between line items when used in the detail sections. If we choose spanning vertical line instead, it will be stretched across all of the line items for a nice clean look. If we keep the line short, it will stretch across all of the line items, but won't inflate the height of them. If we stretch it to make it tall as this detail section, it will stretch the line items without pictures and make them much taller than they need to be. We now see our product pictures displayed on the document along with our dividing line. If we get this far and the pictures still won't show up, we should go back to the product database. A product in a product database must meet 3 criteria to print a picture. A manufacturer part number must be supplied. The vendor field must match the product database that it comes from. And on the Picture tab, the Print Picture checkbox must be checked. Next, let's go over some of our options for variable formatting in our detail sections. Consider lines 1 through 9. In this range, we have 1 heading line, 7 product lines, and then 1 subtotal line. The words first heading, subtotal, and all of the descriptions are all being printed by the same description field in detail section 1, but they have different formatting. Some are bold and some are not. This is the field that's printing all of those descriptions. If we check the font formatting on the description field, we can see that the font style is not set to bold. So how are the heading and subtotal lines turning bold? If we check the Format menu, we can see that Conditional Font is active for this field. We can see the configuration of the conditional formatting by clicking on the menu option. We see a conditional font listed called If Comment Line, then Bold, and the checkbox is turned on. Let's try unchecking the box. Notice that the variations in the formatting are now gone. Editing a conditional font is very much like building a formula field. This conditional font evaluates line types and assigns corresponding named fonts to each. Without going through all of the nuts and bolts, this expression says, If a line is a comment line, make it italic. If a line is a subtotal line, a discount line, or a heading line, make it bold. This is an effective way to vary fonts, but sometimes we may want to vary other details based on the line type. Let's try setting up special formatting for those heading and subtotal lines that will use a different background color and different sets of columns. Multiple detail sections can be used to print different kinds of line items in different ways by adding filters to the sections. Our Layout Designer basic overview video thoroughly explains the printing process and how multiple detail sections are used. We'll add our second detail section by choosing the section menu, then New, and then selecting the next detail section. Now let's say that we're going to use Detail Section 1 to print our product line items, and we're going to use Detail Section 2 to print everything else. So let's shrink it down to make it look more like a single line, and then let's give it a new background color. We can do that by right-clicking and choosing Background Color. From here, we can control turning on and off the background color, choosing a shading type, and changing the color. We'll stick with the solid brush, and then we'll use the QuoteWerks shade of yellow. Now let's add our fields. We at least need the description field to get the text of the headings and the subtotals. And let's make it bold since those were bold before. And since the subtotal lines do still have price information, let's include the extended price field also. And finally, we'll add filters that indicate which detail section should be used to print each line item. We'll start with Detail Section 1. We can right-click and choose Filter. Building a filter is very much like building a formula. We can define criteria using the fields, functions, and operators available from the 6 insert buttons below. This process is covered in much more detail in the separate video on using formula fields in the QuoteWerks Layout Designer. We only want Detail Section 1 to be used for product line items. Product line items have a line type of 1, so we can specify document items line type equals the number 1. Now, only line items with a line type of 1 will qualify for printing by Detail Section 1. Next, we'll add a filter to Detail Section 2. Similarly, since it will be used for all other line items, we can just use the filter line type is greater than number 1. Now only line items with a line type greater than 1 will be printed by Detail Section 2. Finally, let's add some borders to the new section for a cleaner division of the heading and subtotal lines. Now let's take a look at the finished product. Now we see the heading and subtotal lines printing not only in bold but also with a different set of fields and a different background color. We could use the same technique to print heading lines differently than subtotal lines, or even to print different kinds of products in different ways. We have now practiced inserting and formatting fields, using the handy alignment and sizing features to position fields, using the active style features to copy formatting between fields, inserting and formatting pictures, using dividing lines to enhance the appearance, and using section filters to get more flexibility out of our formatting. Thank you for joining us to learn more about QuoteWerks and the power of the QuoteWerks Layout Designer. Please make sure to check out all of our tutorial videos on the Layout Designer to be sure that you're getting the most out of QuoteWerks.